We all know that GB News is a right-wing misinformation slop machine. But this clip from host Beverly Turner with Matthew Stolden is, quite frankly, astonishing.
To pretend there isn't such a thing as far right, or that they're just a few isolated middle-aged men in their bedrooms, is absurd.
It's not pretending, but it's not pretending that those people aren't deluded and hate-filled. They exist, but to suggest that these skirmishes that we've seen in Belfast tonight, because they weren't riots. They weren't riots. There weren't people marauding through the streets with pitchforks.
There was a house set on fire, Beverly. There was a house set on fire. We've seen numerous pictures of fires ablaze in Belfast. This is disgraceful, violent behaviour that is not going to get anyone anywhere. It's going to further terrify communities who are already traumatised by the horrific images that were shown around the world from last night.
And what you have just done is precisely the rage baiting that I am trying to do the opposite of.
What are you talking about?
You are saying, but people's houses are burned down. This is awful, this is awful. I'm saying, actually, it isn't that dramatic. There aren't people, there aren't bodies piled up in hospital tonight,
Someone's house being burnt down in a riot is not that dramatic. What are you saying, Bev? What words are you allowing out of your mouth?
There was no riot. There was no riot.
There was no riot.
There is not a house that has been burnt down. There are no riots. The police aren't even reporting riots.
Did you not see the image of a house on fire?
We've seen
in Belfast.
Yes, but I've seen.
That's not that dramatic. It's pretty dramatic to me.
Your definition. That is, when you use phrases like far right and riots,
Bev, we're going round in circles.
That is not what that is. But
what do you think it is? When a house gets burned down and you had your reporter on the ground who you spoke to at the beginning of this show talking about multiple fires in Belfast caused by civil disorder.
That's right.
You're not calling that a riot? What do you want to call it? What do you want to call it?
No, I'm not calling it a riot.
What do you want to call it then?
I'm not calling it a riot.
What are you calling it?
Because there aren't people in hospital tonight because of what's gone on there. There aren't people in hospital. And I think you are precisely the problem in that you are whipping up the hatred. I'm the problem, not people setting fire to their own city. You are exaggerating.
You have the temerity to call me the problem when I'm calling out violence in Belfast.
My show. I'm talking. I am saying that the commentators that come on the TV like you say, this is outrageous. These were riots tonight. There weren't riots tonight, Matthew. There's a few teenagers who have set alight vehicles and it has been a busy night for the police, and I am not diminishing the reaction. But don't try to whip up the British public into thinking that there is civil war on the streets tonight and people are out with their pitchforks.
That's outrageous, Beverly. I've never said there's civil war. That's an outrageous allegation. I've never said that. You're floundering around for accusations because you are unprepared to properly call out. Sorry. You are unprepared to call out outrageous behaviour on the streets of Belfast. Put me on a single shot, please.
We need to move on because he's not going to stop talking.
The party told you to reject your eyes and ears. It was their most essential final command. That is quite literally George Orwell right there. We've all seen the video and images. She said there's no riots. We've seen that. She even said there was no houses on fire. We have literal footage of a house on fire. A poor man from Belfast literally spoke to camera and said, my house has gone up in flames. There's been multiple mainstream news coverage of it. It's absolutely insane. Yeah, I can't believe what I'm listening to. I mean, look, I wouldn't consider myself much of a supporter of Matthew, but that was 3 minutes of gaslighting him from Turner, claiming he's part of the problem and is being over dramatic, right? But I tell you what, we haven't just seen riots, but we've seen pogroms where people of colour have been attacked. But GB News doesn't care one bit. If they did, why didn't they report on an imam's house being petrol bombed in Bolton? There's no riots. There's no houses on fire. Bev, would you like to take a look at that footage and say there's no houses being burnt down? What about a Muslim woman's front door being bashed by a sledgehammer? Just people going around attacking Muslims and people of colour. Look, GB News has always put out extreme content. I mean, they've platformed people who support remigration, the policy of deporting non-white immigrants. But as the Overton window is continuing to move further to the right, GB News hosts, who are only supposed to use dog whistles and hide their power level, are starting to feel more emboldened. Another host, Alex Armstrong, tweeted this: "Deport them all. Nothing else will stop this. They all have to go. They all must go." Who? All immigrants? Now, he eventually deleted the tweet, but they're becoming more confident in, frankly, their fascist rhetoric. This is Rupert Lowe claiming racism isn't a problem in the UK. Britain doesn't have a racism problem. It has an immigration problem. Is that right? Britain doesn't have a racism problem? What about this? So what you're looking at on your screen right now is a black man who's filming. He's not provoking anyone. He's just standing still and he's being attacked. It was only last week that David Lammy claims we have moved on from Stephen Lawrence and that institutional racism in the police doesn't really exist. If the so-called Progressive Labour Party downplays racism, what do you think is going to happen to the political debate? Well, GB News hosts literally denying reality, saying riots didn't happen. Helena, it feels like there is no end, and we're just moving further and further rightwards. What do you make of Bev Turner's comments?
I mean, I would say we don't have a racism problem. We have a neo-Nazi problem in this country. Like, how else can you describe this? A white nationalism problem, potentially? That's what these people were, these roving gangs of people, especially going around Belfast, right? Going out and attacking people purely on the grounds of the fact that they were being ethnic minorities. People checking people's cars to find out whether they were white or non-white. There were literally signs in Belfast saying, whites only. How else am I supposed to describe this other than white nationalism? What other possible way could we describe it? When you see people who will allude to the idea of ethnically cleansing this country of non-white people, that's the rhetoric that we're hearing from the far right and their supplicant politicians. How else am I supposed to describe it? And the fact that they will essentially try and pull the wool over people's eyes and claim that riots aren't happening in front of our faces, when there is quite literal violent disorder, and again, purely on ethnic grounds, right? With billionaires, and well, I guess trillionaires, I should probably say now, trying to essentially invoke race war in this country. How else can we call it other than a white nationalism problem? I mean, Bev Turner can say whatever she wants because she is an employee of a multi-millionaire funded propaganda organisation which continually pumps out falsehoods, so why should her falsehoods be any different to anybody else's on the channel? It's specifically there as a way with which the far right can launder their viewpoints because the people in charge of these networks feel like they're on some kind of crusade to save the West, because they purely believe that there is some kind of existential crisis at the heart of the West, and they place what used to be immigration, what used to be cultural differences as they would call it, at the hands of all ethnic minorities now. And what the model minorities aren't safe anymore. And when we see the Tommy Robinson, who previously talked about how much he loved the Sikh community, and they're now persona non grata because of one incident involving a Sikh man, which is again what was the talk of the town last week. And now it's all Sudanese people, and now it's just all migrants in general. When it's people who are being divided specifically on their skin colour, that is white nationalism. And these movements can't be allowed to fester. They just have to be dealt with. We have to make sure that we do not have the position we're in at the moment where our pathetic, cowardly human rights liar-in-chief in Westminster can downplay, as you quite rightly say. We're having a downplaying of the racist element, it's the white nationalist element to this. He can happily and correctly call anti-Semitic attacks anti-Semitic when they happen, and yet, when those attacks are white nationalist in nature, he won't use the correct terminology to describe what it is, in case he upsets the rioters, essentially. And there again, the people on the right wing are allowed to just essentially try and pull the wool over people's eyes and deny reality in front of them, because again, that would impugn the motives and indeed the actions that come from the stochastic terrorism that gets pumped out of the right-wing slop media in this country, the far-right slop media in this country. We have to put our foot down. We have to stamp this stuff out. We cannot allow as you point out, the Overton window to get pushed any further, right? Whilst we have got a situation here where we're trying to imply that somehow there is an innate criminality problem with ethnic minorities, which is how the discourse around crime is going in this country, despite none of the statistics backing it up. People have been given the credence in terms of their arguments that they've made in terms of the idea that crime is uniquely a problem that belongs to ethnic minorities, because there were no riots when white people committed these kind of heinous crimes. There were no riots when the high levels of femicide in Belfast, for example, was continually demonstrated in terms of the crime statistics figures. No, because there's no supplicant media out there pushing these things and making it look like it's the fault of one specific demographic. This is so fucking dangerous. And the fact that, again, we literally have a 24/7 propaganda channel pumping this shit out is terrifying to me.
And what's terrifying to me is that the Ofcom won't do anything. The government won't step in.
Not a peep. Yeah, government won't do anything, Ofcom won't do anything here, someone would even call out the ideology behind it. Like, we're sleepwalking into this stuff, whilst, of course, the government at this point in time, from what we've seen today, is building up the surveillance and authoritarian state that will then get weaponized by those same political actors to use against those who oppose their white nationalism. Like, it's not a good time to be someone who supports liberal pluralism in this country.
I was watching Navarra before we came on, and it had Michael Walker and Mansaka Kiambi, friend of the show. Good to see you on there. There was a really interesting discussion, and Michael Walker often likes to play devil's advocate. That's his thing, where he doesn't always believe what he says, but it's good to prompt a discussion. But he was saying, do you think that, that you got the right wing doing their inverse identity politics, and he was kind of saying, do you think that's the response to left wing identity politics? And maybe like the average person who isn't really political, they're going to see, oh, we saw left wing identity politics, and now we're seeing right wing identity politics, and they're just both are the same. Like, I think he talked about Chris Cabba, and a lot of people said, oh, there was a racial element to it. A lot of people assumed that because he was black, and then it turned out that he had was committing crime or what the police were saying, and that it was a bit more nuanced to it. I've got my thoughts on what I want to say, but I thought it was really interesting. Do you think that like the left had too much not too much identity politics, but if there was a scenario in policing and the person was black, do you think in every instance the left jumped on the race thing too early? Is kind of what I'm saying.
I think the Chris Cabba situation is probably a good demonstration of that being the case, right? But the idea that, again, the problem we have to look at is we are taking individual instances in the instigation of discourse as such, rather than looking at the statistics and the evidence, which is, where I base all of my politics, right? And rather than, finding martyrs, which I think what happened in the case of Chris Cabba, we need to talk about the realities in terms of the statistics, and they are all on our side on this issue. And you look at, for example, the two-tier policing discussions. Are there any statistics that the right can bring up? Well, other than the ones that have been forcefully spread by people like the Centre for Migration Control, no, they don't. Like all the statistics show the other direction. Again, because we know they don't actually have controls in any of the studies that they do on any of these things as well. Like when you actually control for when you look at age and gender, for example, of asylum seekers, their crime rate is no different to the remainder of the population. But of course, those kind of things are well beyond the mental capacity of people on the right, or on the far right, I guess. But that's a problem, and I think maybe it is correct to say that the era of standpoint epistemology in Woke One was probably a bad thing. We talk about lived experience rather than what can be empirically demonstrated. I think that was not a good time for discourse, but I feel like in the Woke 2 era we're kind of past that.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned about Woke too, because I think maybe some of us on the left are looking at how, like, the weaponization of anti-Semitism and how this links, because I think, maybe 10 years ago, the idea that we could criticize this particular thing and say, well, a black person's involved, you have to be very careful here. And obviously you should, because there's obviously racial sensitivities. But like when it comes to anti-Semitism, like examples where like Free Palestine is baked on a cake and some people are offended by it, our response now is there's a fucking genocide going on. I mean, there was a tweet from Eve Barlow, and she was in a car with a Jewish friend, and she was driving down the street, and it said a sign saying free parking, and she said, my friend thought it said free Palestine, these Jews are tired. Like, that's literally what she tweeted. And our response would be like, well, that's obviously a joke. Like, what's more important, people taking something that wasn't anti-Semitic and running with it, or a genocide? And I suppose like the argument from Michael is, and I guess maybe you're right as well, like in the sort of woke 1.0 era, Is that kind of the same thing? Did we do that? Although, in my opinion, you're right. The facts are on our side. Like, there is institutional racism in the police. When the right wing say, oh, there's anti-white racism, it's not like both doing identity politics in the same manner. One is correct. Like, there is institutional racism, especially against young black men in the police. There is no institutional, like, anti-white racism. And to be honest, I think that even if we didn't engage in that kind of identity politics, I think the right wing would have done it anyway, because they're like the originals of identity and culture. Like, think of their broad movements. Think of like fascist movements. Are they an economic projects? No, they're largely based on race, religion, ethnicity. So I think they would have done it anyway.
Well, on the Eve Barlow thing, I'm significantly more offended by the idea that we're using prime city centre land and sectioning off entirely for motorists than I am with ending a genocide in Gaza.
Yeah.
But the difference, of course, is that when it came to like spurious accusations of anti-Semitism, they were that totally erroneous, right? The difference, I think, between kind of impugning the motives of the pro-Palestinians as if that's somehow motivated by antipathy towards Jewish people when none such thing exists, is that there's plenty of reasons to believe that the police would target a black person purely on the colour of their skin, because there is so much evidence to show that this is something that already happens. We have the Casey review now as well that shows that these kind of attitudes are pretty prevalent. It was the jumping of the gun to immediately accuse it in every single instance rather than understanding the facts before trying to judge some kind of conclusion, which I think is the problem here. Whereas I can't find any conclusion where you could go, I support Palestine not having to suffer a genocide at the hands of Israel. But there's no anti-Semitic element to that at all, and there feasibly isn't a way in which you could try and read it into those statements. I think that's where the difference is.
Yeah,
and that's what the problem is. I think because again, when it came to talking about police racism, it is kind of so ingrained that most people do kind of see that. The polling is kind of shifting on that, I guess, but it was reasonable to believe for lots of people because it showed up in the data. But no one's really buying the anti-Semitism smears this time. No one's really buying it because, again, people have seen the images of Palestinians being butchered on their phones, and they know that it's being trotted out, again, cynically, and the weaponizing it to try and shut down pro-Palestinian movements.
Yeah, I also think the Liberals just did not help us because they had their identity in no class-based politics, and that did fuck us up, didn't it? And you hear, when we had like Target having like queer flags everywhere, the right were like, they're trying to push your ideology on you. It's like, no, it's just market forces. They just want to make more money because more customers, right? So the Liberals didn't fucking help, but I think I would maybe push back on the idea that the left were too involved with identity politics broadly. I think the right were going to do it anyway.
It is funny that the right are now going, oh, well, all of the companies have all dropped all the Pride stuff, which means we're winning. Okay, so you did know that it was being done cynically to try and generate revenue rather than because they genuinely believed in this stuff. It's almost like they were trying to weaponize this to push a political agenda when they were pretending that it was being done to try and change the culture from the inside, with like woke directors were forcing queerness upon business rather than being done because they thought that there was money to be made, which is always the case. The idea that somehow the leftists had fully embraced rainbow capitalism when we're the ones who invented the term
of it.
Rainbow capitalism.
Yeah.
I almost said rainbow capitalism there, which would also be an accurate description. Like, we were always calling this out. We knew that corporations we always knew that corporations never sincerely had the interests of minorities at heart. They just thought they would be able to generate extra revenue because that's how capitalism fucking works.
And people watch the show know that like you really have to mar social issues with class issues. Make sure that the unifying message is class. But I'm also skeptical of the argument that we need to completely drop like social issues, because I use David Lamb as an example, and of course, obviously, he's trash and everything. But he thinks, oh, if I say we've moved on from Stephen Lawrence, if I say there's not really any institutional racism, like that problem will go away. But it hasn't, because what's happened now is once upon a time, the right would say, oh, we're colorblind. Like, we don't see race. And actually, there isn't really institutional racism. We're all equal under the law. And now the debate has gone to, well, actually, it's almost becoming politically not correct to say that institutional racism exists, apparently according to David Lammy. And the right wing are going, oh, thank you so much. You agree with me now. We don't see color. They're going, no, actually, we do see color. There is institutional racism. It's anti-white racism. So I think by capitulating on that, I think we're just giving into that framing too.